Welcome to the King Tales. Thank you for the love and support. Let's dive in. The future they chose. Years later, on a quiet afternoon washed in sunlight, Juliet stood by the window of her office, watching the city move below. She no longer felt the weight of the past in her chest. It lived behind her now, acknowledged, respected, but no longer feared. When she turned, David was there, reading through reports, his presence as steady as it had always been. "Do you ever think about how close we were to losing all of this?" she asked softly. David looked up and smiled. "Every day. That's why I never take it for granted." They had built a life shaped by intention. Every decision carried honesty. Every promise was spoken aloud and kept. Love, they discovered, was not something that simply happened, it was something they protected. David's mother often joined them for dinner, her laughter filling the rooms Juliet once feared would stay empty forever. Sometimes she would pause, look at them both, and whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude, for freedom, for truth, for the strange, painful road that had led them here. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, David took Juliet's hand and led her to the balcony. The city hummed below them, alive and unbroken. "No matter what the world brings," he said, his voice calm and sure, "we will face it honestly." Juliet squeezed his hand. Together. And in that simple promise, free of secrets, free of fear, they found everything they had ever been searching for. Because the strongest love isn't loud. It's steady. A quiet promise. Time moved forward, as it always does, but it moved kindly now. Juliet and David learned the rhythm of ordinary happiness, the kind no one applauds, yet everyone longs for. Mornings began with shared coffee and unspoken understanding. Nights ended with gratitude, not relief. They no longer needed to prove anything to the world. They had already survived what could have broken them. There were moments when echoes of the past returned, an old headline, a familiar street, a name overheard in passing. In those moments, Juliet would feel David's hand tighten around hers, steady and present, reminding her that the past no longer owned them. And when David felt the weight of memory press too close, Juliet would meet his eyes and ground him in now. One afternoon, while walking through the city park, David stopped beneath a wide, ancient tree. He looked at Juliet, his expression thoughtful. "This tree has stood through storms," he said. "Through fire, through wind. Still standing." Juliet smiled. "So have we." He nodded. "That's what love is, isn't it? Not the absence of storms, but choosing to stand anyway." She leaned into him, her head against his chest. "And choosing each other every time." The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the grass, but they were no longer afraid of shadows. They knew light and darkness could exist together, and that love was strong enough to hold both. They walked on, hand in hand, not toward an ending, but into a life still unfolding. Because some promises are not spoken once. They are lived every single day. Ever after, gently. Seasons changed, and with them came new chapters, quiet ones, steady ones. Juliet and David learned that happiness didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived as a shared glance across a crowded room, or the comfort of knowing someone would be there when the day grew heavy. They faced challenges, of course. Work demanded sacrifices. Life tested patience. But they had learned the language of honesty, and it guided them through every disagreement, every fear. They spoke when it was hard. They listened when it mattered most. Silence no longer meant distance, it meant understanding. On an ordinary evening, as rain traced slow lines down the windows, Juliet rested her head on David's shoulder. "Do you think the past ever truly leaves us?" she asked. David considered this, then answered softly. "No. But it stops hurting. It becomes a teacher instead of a wound." Juliet smiled, content with that truth. They continued building a life rooted in purpose, helping others find justice, lifting voices that had been ignored, choosing kindness even when no one was watching. Their love became less about passion and more about presence, less about rescue and more about partnership. And so their story went on, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with something far rarer. A love that stayed. What remained? In the end, what endured was not the pain, nor the betrayal, nor the long road that brought them together. What remained was choice. Juliet chose courage every time she opened her heart again. David chose truth each time fear tried to pull him back into silence. Together, they chose to believe that love could be honest without being fragile, strong without being cruel. Their home filled with warmth, shared meals, quiet laughter, evenings where nothing extraordinary happened, yet everything felt complete. The emptiness Juliet once feared never returned. It had been replaced by presence, by belonging. People who crossed their path often felt it without knowing why, the calm, the certainty, the unspoken trust between them. Some stories don't need explanation. They are felt. And when the future came, as it always does, with its questions and unknowns, Juliet and David met it side by side. Not because life was easy, but because they were ready. Because love, when built on truth, does not fade. It settles into something lasting. And that was there forever. Still, they chose tomorrow. Even forever had mornings. Juliet learned this one quiet dawn as she watched sunlight creep across the floor, David still asleep beside her. There was no drama waiting outside the window. No storm. No rescue. Just another day asking to be lived honestly. She smiled, realizing this was the victory they had earned, the calm after choosing truth again and again. David woke to the sound of her moving about the kitchen. He joined her without words, wrapping his arms around her from behind. For a moment, they stayed like that, breathing in sync. "We're okay," he said softly, not as a question, but as a truth. "Yes," Juliet replied. "We really are." They didn't speak much about the past anymore. Not because it was forbidden, but because it had finally found its place. It lived behind them, no longer demanding attention. What mattered was what they built daily: patience when tempers rose, honesty when fear whispered, love when silence felt easier. Sometimes they failed. Sometimes they argued. But they never hid. And that made all the difference. On weekends, David's mother would visit, bringing stories and food and laughter that filled every corner of the house. She would watch them quietly, pride shining in her eyes, not just because her son was free, but because he was whole. And so life continued, not perfect, not painless, but real. Two people who had been broken chose truth. Chose forgiveness. Chose each other again and again. And that choice, made daily, became the story that never truly ended. A life lived honestly. Years rolled on, gentle and steady. Juliet and David no longer measured life by crises survived or battles fought, they measured it by small, deliberate joys, shared cups of tea in the morning, quiet walks through the city at dusk, laughter that echoed easily without fear of it breaking. Their love had grown deep, like roots beneath the soil, unseen but unshakable. They faced challenges, of course, business pressures, family demands, the occasional reminder of old wounds, but always together, always honestly. David often thought about the boy he had once been, filled with fear and secrets. Now, he was a man defined by courage, truth, and the love he freely gave and received. Juliet, once fragile and cautious, had become unshakable in her strength, not because she no longer felt fear, but because she had learned to face it with trust in the people who mattered most. One evening, as twilight painted the city in shades of gold and gray, they stood together on the balcony of their home, watching the world move below. David took Juliet's hand. "We've built something that no one can take from us," he said softly. She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "Not even time," she whispered. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, they understood fully that love, true love, was not the spark of passion or the thrill of drama. It was the steady, deliberate choice to face life honestly, side by side, with hearts open and hands joined. Because life may test you with lies, betrayal, and secrets, but it cannot break the courage that chooses truth, forgiveness, and love every single day. And so they continued, not as a story told in headlines or whispered gossip, but as a life lived honestly, completely, and unshakably. The final dawn. Time passed, softly, without fanfare. Seasons came and went, painting the city and the world in ever-changing colors, but Juliet and David remained, a steady presence in each other's lives. They no longer waited for storms to pass, they had learned to walk through them together, unafraid, unbroken. One early morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through their window, Juliet stirred and found David already awake, gazing out at the horizon. The sky glowed with quiet gold, promising nothing and yet offering everything. She moved to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We made it," she said softly. David smiled, eyes still on the sunrise. "We did," he replied. "Not because life spared us, but because we chose each other, every single day." They stood in silence, watching the world awaken, knowing that the past, painful, shadowed, unforgiving, no longer held power over them. It existed only as memory, as a teacher, and as a testament to their strength. And in that still, golden dawn, they understood something eternal, that love built on truth, forgiveness, and courage does not fade. It endures. It grows. It becomes a life worth living. The world outside moved on, as it always would. But inside, Juliet and David had found a home, not in walls, not in wealth, not in accolades, but in each other. And in that choice, every dawn, they discovered forever eternal truth. And so their story settled, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of lives lived honestly. They learned that love is not measured in grand gestures or fiery passion, but in trust kept, promises honored, and the courage to face life together, even when the past cast long shadows. They loved fully, forgave openly, and lived deliberately, knowing that every choice mattered. Justice had been done, wounds had been healed, and hearts once broken had become strong enough to hold the world without fear. In the end, Juliet and David understood the most profound truth: life may test you with betrayal, secrets, and loss, but love, when rooted in honesty, courage, and forgiveness, endures beyond time. It grows quietly, steadily, like sunlight through the trees, and it carries with it the power to heal, to redeem, and to transform. Their story did not end, it became a testament. A life lived bravely, a love chosen daily, a legacy of truth that would echo far beyond them, into every heart willing to listen. Because in the storm of life, only truth, love, and forgiveness are eternal. The last word. And so, beneath the endless sky, with the city breathing softly around them, Juliet and David stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, and souls unburdened. Every trial, every secret, every tear had led them here, to a quiet place where love was no longer fragile, but unshakable. They understood, at last, that life storms could never touch the truth they carried within, the courage to forgive, the honesty to be seen fully, and the willingness to choose each other again and again. And in that understanding, they realized something simple, eternal, and undeniable: some loves are not fleeting, they are forever. The past had shaped them. The present held them. And the future, whatever it brought, would always find them standing together, steadfast, unbroken, and entirely whole. Timeless ending. Years passed, but nothing shook what Juliet and David had built. Their love, forged in truth and tempered by pain, became a quiet force, steady, enduring, and unbreakable. They faced life's challenges side by side, never hiding, never fearing, always choosing honesty and forgiveness. Their hearts, once fragile and scarred, were now whole. Their family, their friends, their work all reflected the strength of the lives they had rebuilt. And in every sunrise, every shared laugh, every silent moment of understanding, they were reminded of the truth that had guided them through every storm: love that chooses courage, forgiveness, and honesty is eternal. No matter what storms came, no matter how dark the nights, Juliet and David knew this: together, they had found forever.